G'day and welcome to New England Today. And our topic today is housing. And it's in every conversation these days. The price of a house, why they're so expensive, and there are lots and lots of reasons for that. In fact, it's very complex. But there's one thing we can actually start doing, and in fact one person has started doing it, to start helping the problem and, moving us into a place where everyone can have a roof over their head. The person I'm talking about is Ben Scott, and he's had a lot of talks with the government, he's had a lot of talks with private enterprise, and now, well, in his own words, the action's begun.
Is something that government's acutely focused on. Unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to fix. So the challenges facing government at the moment are, once again, it's easy to talk but hard to do, and I appreciate that, but I also think that there could be more doing from government and less talking. So we're part of a couple of roundtables and task force with various government bodies, particularly focused on modular building, because there is an increased interest from government on modular. Might be from the perspective of, I think there might be a magic wand that it could be done quicker, but I think they're learning that's not necessarily the case.
Ben Scott and his family started in Armidale 25 years ago, this month in fact, and they started with an idea and nothing else.
Well, clearly 25 years ago, right? It was just down the street from where we are today, a little block of gravel, shipping container, little brick office, myself, my brother and his son, so three Scots. And here we are today, 25 years later, with, 230 something employees here in Armidale.
So where did it start with you? What's your background? What was your...
So we, a South African family, we moved to Armidale from Cape Town, which is a coastal city, moved to a regional town, coastal to Armidale, nice and temperate, nice and cold. But here we are 25 years later. So yeah, our whole family moved out of the country back then, landed here. We tried to start business doing what we had been doing in South Africa, which was in the electronics and electrical industry. So very different to what we're doing now. The markets here versus there were completely different. So we were looking for something new and got into the modular building. It was introduced to us through a friend of a friend. We'll be dead honest and say it's something we knew absolutely nothing about. But let's just say we've got 25 years of experience now.
What was the first project? Do you remember what that really was, that project was?
The very first building, I do remember. It was not only a client we remember, a guy by the name of Arthur was his name, to be precise. He trusted us with our very first order. And I remember building it with my own two hands back then. Obviously, that was the job description. But in a lot of learning curves along the way, like we were new to building, and building wasn't, we were always practical people, but building wasn't where we had come from. So both that and modular building was all very new to us.
You've done quite a bit of, you've had a voice in government. You've got their ear, or they want your voice,
right? However
you want to look at it. What impact have you had on the housing issue, do you think? Not so much the building, but in what you've said, and how much have they listened?
That's a deep question with long, winding roads on it. I think the housing crisis is one of the biggest issues facing government at this point in time, and not just local governments, but state and federal governments. So it's a massive issue. Our immigration numbers are up, which I think is a good thing for the country. We're a small country by population. As I say, we do business in the US. 25, 26 million people like we are in this country of Australia is just a drop in the bucket in larger countries. So immigration is a good thing. Some people are talking against it, but I think it's a great idea. But it does put pressure on housing. So the needs of creating more housing is something that government's acutely focused on. Unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to fix. So the challenges facing government at the moment are, once again, it's easy to talk but hard to do, and I appreciate that, but I also think that there could be more doing from government and less talking. So we're part of a couple of roundtables and task force with various government bodies, particularly focused on modular building, because there is an increased interest from government on modular. Might be from the perspective of, I think there might be a magic wand that it could be done quicker, but I think they're learning that's not necessarily the case. But there does need to be, I think, less roundtabling, less task forcing, less talking, and more doing, because industry is ready to support. People like ourselves and other people in the game, at one of those roundtables we had the discussion, what do we need to do to get this moving quicker was the question. us from industry's answer was, how about writing a couple of purchase orders? Like, let's make this happen. Action rather than words.
Yeah, I guess that is the thing too. If you don't get in there and do it, I've been speaking to a few people of late who, particularly in the solar industry, that just had to go and do it because there was a lot of talk around what had to be done and what didn't have to be done and how we can do it. I said, well, can we just do it? Yeah.
And in the whole renewable energy space, which obviously Armidale falls within that res, the challenge here is there's a strong need for workforce housing. And we're not an area which is used to that need, like unlike mining areas in northern Queensland or Western Australia, where they're quite familiar with that need and they're familiar with things like mining camps, which have a terribly bad name for themselves but serve an extremely important purpose. This area here and other renewable energy zones aren't familiar with that type of accommodation need. So there's definitely the local council here, for instance, in Armidale, they're trying really hard to get their heads around it. And the community needs to get its head around it as well. Like, it's a need and an opportunity. Don't look at it as a bad thing that's going to trash the town. Look at it as an opportunity that's going to bring economic benefit to the town.
Absolutely, and that's a great way of looking at it. And it is that it's a social construct. It's not. The reality is you can do it. This can be done. It's just we have to get our heads around what's being done. And I guess getting that word out that's on you too, is to a certain extent, or is it the government?
It's on everybody to speak. And I've been speaking with some of these large energy providers, and they actually, and this is speaking against us as a region now for a minute, they're looking at Armidale particularly as an area which tends to be anti-development. There seems to be that bit of psyche in town. I'd encourage the locals to try change that thinking, because if that's the thinking we go down, we're going to continue to have a main street with nobody walking down it, with no shops behind the windows. Economic activity is a good thing. It brings benefits socially right throughout the town. So is there a perfect economic driver that would be lovely to have and tick all the boxes that make everybody happy? Probably not, but all economic activity is good activity in the end of the day. Within reason. I'm not trying to be blasé about it, but I think you understand the point.
How have you geared to produce more of these places? What have you done over the last little while to change the way you operate?
Sure. So we've created additional capacity, not specifically for government-related housing or mining, just in general capacity increase. So over the last, without going all the way back 25 years, but even over the last 3 years or so, we've created a complete new manufacturing facility right here, which has doubled our production capacity. So both creating capacity in this Uniplan, the modular building business, but also creating capacity in our other business entities, so in Timberline and Duraclass. So at the same time as building this building we're sitting in right now, which is for the modular building, it moved out of a factory where we were and created more space for Timberline, where we completely revamped the fabrication processes and manufacturing processes, introducing a whole lot more smart technology, robotics to a certain degree, and created another, about 80% capacity in that business too. So we've continually invested back into the town, back into facilities here. Sometimes we think we may be gluttons for punishment. We continually reinvest and find new opportunities, but hey, it's a good thing for everybody.
With your places, and I need to understand what size the houses are, from the smallest to the largest. What is?
So our typical range of product we're manufacturing is anything from a single bedroom, quite small unit, all the way through to large and complex buildings, which might have multiple modules, as we call them, so multiple pieces of building that get put together. So you manufacture them in multiple modules, send them out on multiple trucks, and then bring the whole building back together again. So that could be a 4 or 5 bedroom house that you're building in 3 pieces, sending out on the back of 3 different trucks and pulling together. In addition to that, we're also doing things like motel type construction. So we do quite a bit of worker accommodation in the agri business, so rural and remote farm worker accommodation, and quite often that'll be in a motel type construction. And then in the US, we actually get more adventurous. We go all the way into multi-story modular hotel construction. So over in the US, we've done...
To what height?
So we've gone all the way up to 5- and 6-story buildings in the US. So that might be sort of 100, 150 modules that all stack on each other almost like shipping containers to make a complete hotel.
What's the life of one of these places?
As of a building?
Yeah.
Exact same. Well, let's wind it back. The construction methods are different to built on site, but the fundamental outcome of the product is the same. So just the same expectations of the life cycle of any other building. A modular building is no different. The only difference is we have to put additional engineering and bracing in it to cater for that transport. So in essence, you could say, well, there's extra we're putting in there compared to what would normally be done on site.
Yeah. Okay. And I've had a look at a few of your places too, and I was a bit blown away because I come from the background where it's either you see the mining ones or, demountables at schools and things like that. And you think, oh, that's what it is. When you look at them. So you've got designers who are obviously doing aesthetics as well as...
Absolutely. And that's probably one of modular buildings' biggest issues is the perception of what it is. As you mentioned, school buildings, so many Aussie kids that are your age or mine have sat in a freezing cold modular donga type prefab school building and you don't have very pleasant memories of it. Or have holidayed at a caravan park in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and that era had a similar sort of feel to it. It was very much of a mining campy sort of a product, where that product's evolved completely, as in I could put you inside a modular built house and you would not know the difference from a house built on site. Like the finishes, fittings, everything inside of them can be as good as any other method of building.
What's the plan for over the next few years to build? Is this going to be government driven, or is it you're going to the private sector and saying, where do you want these houses? How do you go about that?
Yeah, sure. So we have a number of different market segments that we play within already. So we cover things like tourism and resorts. We cover things like retiree villages and over 55s lifestyle estates. And then, of course, residential building, any residential home, particularly in rural and regional areas. And then along with that, the work the government's doing will be like another stream on top of that. So, for instance, the Queensland government has already got on this bandwagon and has been doing modular now for 2 to 3 years, where they're using it in rural accommodation for remote workers, so police, nursing, and those sort of staff which are in remote and rural areas where it's really difficult to get staff, and also in those regional areas, modular has a greater level of acceptance than in a completely metro area. So New South Wales government is looking down that same path, so key worker accommodation. Once they get their plan and process in place, which is what they're still working on, we see them rolling that out in the same method as what the Queensland government is doing.
All right. So, there's a fairly solid plan. It's just
there is.
You've just got to. I guess it comes down to your production and how much you can produce, and the other side of that is transport and getting it delivered to the sites. That's a big cost, isn't it? That is. I'm thinking in Western Australia, for instance, a lot of the mining areas, housing is through the roof because it's not so much the material; it's getting it there.
Yeah, there's an element of that, but it's probably not as big an issue as it appears in people's minds, particularly with the lens of a modular building that needs to be transported. The efficiencies of building within a factory far outweigh the inefficiencies of transporting the completely finished goods to site. So you could sort of use the analogy that rather than having 1,000 trucks bringing plasterboard and pipes and electrical and roofing and everything to a site, you've got one truck taking the whole bunch in one big go. So that's probably not the biggest driver. The biggest difference with the efficiencies and getting it done is just purely that managing the approval and certification part of it, so that you've got everything in place to make the project happen. So it's definitely not capacity of manufacturers like us and our competitors, if you like, that are holding back the industry. There's capacity there to be drawn on. It's more the willpower and the decision to actually move ahead and get stuff done by either private investors or, in this case, the government getting their head in the space for making this program roll out. Okay,
so and we've discussed one particular council. It's about council understanding what it is too in all these regions too, because there's getting that perception right, I guess, is the big one. But Are you finding in a lot of the smaller communities, not so much Armidale and Tamworth, but some of the smaller communities, are they more open to bringing in housing?
They're definitely open from the perspective that they want more housing provided. There is definitely a grey area, though, in the whole approval process for modular, and the New South Wales Planning Department is actually working on a completely revamped building bill at this point in time, and which is a good thing. It's been talked about for many years, and getting it done is a great idea, and they seem to be getting good traction on it. And that's going to, at the moment, any modular building is sort of sat separate to traditional building, which means when it's different, then it has unknowns and there's grey areas and councils don't quite know how to approve it. So it has been a grey area in the past. What they're proposing is wrapping it into the building legislation and you might say normalising it and having proper approval pathways, which will be a fantastic thing if that does get done, because that will then give everybody the right framework to operate within. Having said all of that, what we are seeing at the moment is there is definitely an increase in, you might call it red tape within the building space. Certification requirements and approvals is becoming harder and harder. The requirement for licensing is becoming harder and harder. So these, which I suppose is expected in any evolving industry, but those two things definitely need to work along with each other, the certification, approvals, licensing, along with what they're proposing from the building bill.
Yeah. From a living point too, though, I know there was a big, and this is not your business, but there was a big move towards tiny houses, and people were jumping into these things and buying a bit of land and going on there, but regulation said no, you can't stay here on your own piece of land with a tiny house. So I don't know if there are any regulations like that. It's not your houses are permanent fixtures, but
correct. Yeah, so the tiny house regulation is being updated as well. And you explained it pretty much exactly right. There was this perception that a tiny house on wheels, you can just put it anywhere and do what you like. That unfortunately isn't the case, and shouldn't be the case. It's still a dwelling that needs to be regulated. So those regulations are increasing, and I believe there'll be a certain stream within the Building Act which addresses that and formalises what that process should be. So that what we really just need is clarity in regulation, so everybody knows what the train tracks are we're riding on, and we can just make the train go faster then, rather than tracks going all over the place and trains tipping over.
Yeah, yes. And the last part of this, I guess, too, is about the people who are living in these places too. And you've already explained that these are homes. They're homes. Correct. They're houses, but they're homes. And there is a big move. I've just moved out of Sydney, but people quite like units. They're not overly worried about the size of the place because they're doing other things as long as the infrastructure around them is okay. Mm-hmm. In regional Australia, though, are we still thinking we need a big 5-bedroom house, or are we okay to be in a smaller place? Do you think people would accept that?
It's an interesting one. I haven't given much thought to that, and I think that mindset might also be shifting with different demographies as well. So the like different countries, you would no doubt travelled as well. Different countries have completely different living norms. The Australian one has always been the big veranda out the front and nice big bedrooms and a big acreage out the back. So in its utopian sense, but I think probably norms are shifting. Whether that'll change in regional areas, I probably don't think as fast, but more compact living in the cities is definitely what's on the cards with government.
Okay, so but that's a shift in thinking from government, but it's also probably not too much of a shift of thinking from people. As long as they've got a roof over their head and there's a bit of security.
That's one of the primary functions, isn't it?
The future's looking fairly bright for. It looks like government is listening.
Yep.
It looks like you and many others have got the ability to be able to do this, the capability of being able to deliver this.
Absolutely.
So the impact on housing is positive. It's still going to come down to pricing, though, isn't it?
Correct.
Because we need to get some sort of understanding of where this stops, where the threshold is.
You talk about prices. Inflationary pressures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tricky. I mean, we can always look back in history, and inflation is a thing, right? Like this isn't something that's never happened before. So it will find its level. That's what everybody else's job, the RBA and the government. You and I aren't going to fix that problem. But along with that, the regulatory and approval processes and those increases I was talking about just before, that is something that is definitely impacting price. So it's not just an inflationary thing, it is a lifting of the standards of buildings more broadly, like energy efficiency or access and mobility, those sorts of things. There's a bunch of that's happening in the National Construction Code or the Building Code of Australia, which is having an impact on costs. But I think if people understand that, the government obviously understands that, it's not something that's going to block activity happening. We still need houses built, right? We still need more roofs over our heads.
Ben Scott, thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That's Ben Scott with a solution to a big problem in Australia, New South Wales and the New England in particular. If you like what you're watching here and you'd like to see more, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We need to see your eyes on board to continue on. It's all free of charge. The story I've written about this is on the New England Times. That's free. And this channel is free and is going to remain that way. So read the New England Times, watch New England Today, all free. And I'll see you next time.